Hi everyone, my name is Sly Sarkisova. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. I work with folks around issues of trauma, mental health, coping and functioning, relationships, sex and sexuality, identities, all sorts of things. I work with individuals and people in relationships of various shapes and sizes. I've been doing this work for 20 years and just going to talk to you a little bit about some of my thoughts and theories and experiences supporting folks around sex, sexuality, desire, and the intersections of trauma. The first question you might have is, how do sex, trauma, and maybe oppression, our lived experiences of oppression, relate? I don't think we talk about this enough in our communities, right? We are living with legacies of oppression. We're living with legacies of colonialism, racism, homophobia and transphobia, ableism, all sorts of things. And they're amplified depending on our intersections of our lived experiences. Queer and trans people have various legacies of oppression that we have survived and are still surviving, depending on the decade and time and place that you grew up, the influences in your immediate culture, surroundings, and your family of origins. That will determine how much harm you've experienced as a queer or trans person or an LGBTQ person. Now, we might think that, if we're in our 40s or 50s or 60s or 30s or even in our 20s, that we've survived the worst of it in our past in terms of trauma and oppression. And, we're now adults, we're moving forward. But we often have legacies of oppression and trauma that are unaddressed well into our adulthoods and tremendous legacies of pain. So how do sex, trauma, and oppression relate? Well, we see first of all, we see oppression continually played out in our lives and in our communities, so it's always kind of there. We can compartmentalize it, we can escape it, we can change the channel, but we may be living more or less with those legacies of oppression and harm in the day-to-day. Where does that live? Lives in our minds, lives in our spirits, in our hearts, in our emotional lives, in our relationships, and in our bodies. If we have unaddressed legacies of trauma and harm, either familial trauma, community-based trauma, historical traumas, or oppression-based trauma, societal oppression, that affects how we view ourselves and how we relate to our bodies and our sex and sexuality. How do we see ourselves? How do we feel in our bodies? How do we feel comfortable? And more importantly, how are our emotional needs met in the world? And this is what I want to talk to you today about. What are the ways in which trauma shows up in our bodies and in our sexual pursuits? Well, you may ask yourself a simple question. Do you have a satisfying relationship with your body? Yes or no? Okay, that could be a complicated question, or maybe for some folks it's very straightforward. And what is your relationship to your body and other people? People you desire, and who you want to desire you. And if you ask yourself those two questions, you will see either an orientation towards seeking certain needs getting met, such as connection, safety, belonging, acceptance, or you may have other needs coming up, right? To feel desired, to feel sexy, to feel empowered, to feel powerful, to feel embodied. We can address a whole bunch of needs by being in our bodies in a sexual way with others. Now, we often sort of have these stereotypes about, what it means to be queer or gay or whatever, and to be sexual. And that's often to be very sexual, the hypersexual stereotypes, right? It's like everybody fucks all the time, fucking is plentiful, we love fucking, all that sort of stuff. Well, that can be true, and that can be a wonderful part of our lives, right? We can be very liberated, we can have lots of sex, we can enjoy our sex and all that sort of stuff. On the flip side of that, there can be also an experience of sex and pleasure in our bodies where we are seeking to get emotional needs met that we haven't gotten met historically in our day-to-day lives due to our experiences in our families of origin, and trauma and or rejection or neglect, or in society at large, or even in our communities proper. So if folks are experiencing transphobia in communities, ableism in communities, racism in communities, colonialism in communities, you might not find that you are accepted and welcomed and belonging and desired in the ways in which we classically, as a queer community, like to think of ourselves as holding up, right? We don't necessarily treat each other equally and with reverence and desire that we actually want for ourselves. So this trauma, oppression, legacies, they play out in our bodies, they play out in our minds, they play out in our spirits, and they play out in the ways in which we seek connection with others through a sexual means or relational means, or through the ways in which we seek pleasure, stimulation, and the like. So you might want to pay attention to the ways in which you engage with your body and the comfort or discomfort that you might have. Are you finding that you are experiencing safety and belonging when you're around others in a sexual setting, or on dates, or in the community at large, or when you're trying to hook up? Do you feel included, accepted, supported, seen, known? Or do you feel that it's none of the above and you're simply getting your needs met and you enjoy that and whatnot? Like, there can be multiple pathways to engaging in our libidos and sex and bodies and things like that. But the thing to keep in mind is, you might have some unconscious drivers that are maybe more emotional in nature that play out. Those emotional needs might play out in the ways in which you seek sexual or physical intimacy with others. And you might want to keep track of, is this working for me or not, right? Because depending on the opportunities we have for connection, for love, for belonging, for attachment, for relationships, and simply for sex, or all the above, depending on those opportunities, that will determine, what emotional needs are left unmet. And if we have experienced emotional needs being unmet over long periods of time in our lives, right, from our family of origin through to adolescence, adulthood, we might have had many disruptions to those opportunities because of the fact that we've had to live through homophobia, transphobia, racism, whatever. And so we might have legacies of longing, right? Legacies of longing to connect physically, legacies of longing for a relationship, legacies of longing for just interpersonal connection, right, and belonging. And that still might not fully be met, okay? And so if you feel like, what you're pursuing is enhancing your experience of your body, it's enhancing your experience of like control over your surroundings, of yourself, of your life, it's feeling empowered, if you feel good coming away from it, that's wonderful and that's enriching. But it could be the case too that we're living with isolation in general, even outside of the pandemic. We are often living with profound loneliness. We might be living in a fragmented way. We might have a lot of loss that we're living through, loss of families, loss of friends, loss of communities, loss of community members or peers, loss of lived experiences, that you might have been able to have experienced had you not, experienced transphobia or homophobia or ableism or whatnot. So you might be living with unmet needs that are quite valid and need to be addressed. But sometimes we can find ways and avenues, such as pleasure, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But we want to start to get curious about the impacts of, are we seeking pleasure for the sake of connection? And is the way we're seeking pleasure helping us or harming us, or something else? Is it neutral? It can be any of those things. Because the ways in which we seek pleasure and physical connection and physicality can also reinforce experiences of isolation and disconnection and exacerbate those unmet needs. So there are some complicated ways in which, what we've lived through so far in our lives as queer and trans people or LGBTQ people, we have to live with a certain degree of maybe unmet needs, depending on our lived experiences. And we have to understand the pressures internally and socially that we experience when we are thinking of our bodies and being sexual in our bodies and with other bodies, And one of the things that I work with and see in my practice is these intersections of oppression, trauma, and how we feel about ourselves body-wise, what kind of safety and comfort we experience. Do we experience pride? Do we experience shame? Do we experience loathing? What are we experiencing, and what is driving our desire to seek intimacy? One of the complicating issues to think about when we're dealing with our own libidos, sexuality, physical bodies, and the desire to connect, even if it's for casual sex or whatnot, is this idea of how embodied are we and are we comfortable with? And again, the question here is more, are we providing opportunities to meet our needs, either socially, emotionally, or physically, in ways that help us? Or are we feeling compelled to fill needs that are unmet in ways that could be harmful to us? And that's where we could see patterns play out, where we might be left unfulfilled if we're seeking physical opportunities to connect casually, based in unmet emotional needs. We might not find that those experiences are good. Some of them can be, and that's wonderful if they are. But if they're not, and we experience harm through those patterns and pleasure seeking, we might experience accumulated harms as we're continuing to pursue our own embodied experiences sexually. And this is where it can get complicated, and we can get into patterns that are not feeling super great for us in terms of like living in our bodies sexually, right? It's like, I want to feel good. I want to feel connected. I want to feel seen. I want to feel like a part of the community. Where do I go to do that? And how do I know I'm feeling good when I'm doing it? And how am I left feeling after I've done it? Am I left feeling like that was the most amazing sex I've ever had in my life? Or, that was good, I enjoyed it. Or, it was neutral, I could take it or leave it. Or, a sense of shame. Sometimes that could be the case. You could be left feeling worse. You could be left feeling more lonely. You could be left feeling more disconnected. You could be left feeling triggered or traumatized in your body, depending on what has happened. And these are the cues that we want to notice and pay attention to, because our needs matter. Our emotional needs matter. Our social needs matter. And there are ways to proactively deal with those unmet needs, even though we've been through everything we've been through, right? There are ways to proactively tackle those needs and build the opportunities that are going to be healthy and fruitful for us and nourishing that sense of empowerment, pride, confidence in our bodies. But what we also want to be very mindful of is the opposite, right? Like when our pleasure seeking or intimacy seeking actually doesn't end up in helpful ways to increase those opportunities for connection, desire, desirability, and empowerment in our bodies. So one of the ways that we can track whether or not we are pursuing intimacy physically in ways that meet our needs versus whether they may be problematic to our experience of feeling good in ourselves is to sort of start to notice, am I feeling embodied? Am I feeling present? Am I feeling aroused? Am I feeling safe? Am I feeling secure? And am I feeling pleasure? Or am I feeling maybe numb? Am I feeling pain? Am I feeling disconnection? Am I feeling shame? Am I feeling heightened anxiety, fear, revulsion, loathing? These are some of the things that we can pay attention to. And what cues are our bodies giving us? Are our bodies amping up? Are they feeling more hyper aroused and not at rest? Are we feeling under aroused? Are we feeling low? Are we feeling slow? Are we feeling stuck or frozen, like we can't make a move? If we're noticing any of those cues, we might be more in a zone where we are feeling distress that we're not aware of even. And that might be at play when we are trying to pursue pleasure. And if that's the case, we want to be very mindful of those cues and start to take plans of action to keep us safe and to remove us from situations that may be undesirable for us, that may not be in our best interests and may not meet those unmet needs that we're trying to get met. If we're feeling relaxed, if we're feeling safe, if we're feeling sexy, if we're feeling aroused, if we're feeling confident, if we're feeling, you know, free access to pleasure, if we're feeling lust, if we're feeling all sorts of those things, if we're generally relaxed and okay, those might be positive cues that signal a yes, that we are enjoying these activities and we wish to continue, and some of our needs are going to get met. So, this is just an opening, just a primer, sort of painting the landscape of like the cues that our body is giving us, the unmet emotional needs we might be holding, and to start to look at how are we meeting those needs and how might those needs be coming out in unaddressed ways in the ways in which we engage with our bodies, sex, sexuality, desire, and pleasure. So we'll have to talk more about this in the future, and it's a pleasure, and take good care.